Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and today we are covering the 22nd day. This is the first day of the 4th week in Ukraine. It's incredible to believe that Ukraine has made it this far into this war. No one expected that the country of Ukraine would last beyond the first few hours of the first day, yet here we are into the 4th week, and Ukraine still stands, and it got incredible news today, which I'll discuss in a bit. First, to discuss our schedule, we'll not be covering international news today, as I did not find anything worth reporting. There's actually a bit of an algorithm that we do now, because we actually are able to access so much content and so much information now due to my great team of mods, that we have had to start limiting it down to around 40 marks per day, or else the streams will just go on way too long. So we didn't find any international news that was pressingly important today. I will mention this, though, before we start. There is some kind of group of Russian ships near the Sea of Japan that are sailing at the moment with vehicles and supplies on board, but we don't know where their destination is. But we're assuming that they may be heading to the Black Sea. We don't know that at the moment, but it's the normal schedule that we've always followed, and we're going to follow it today, is that we're going to cover the Northern Front first. We will then move on to the Eastern Front, and in between, we're going to answer some questions in between the Eastern and, the Northern and Eastern Fronts. We'll then cover the Eastern Front and the location unknowns. Then we will move on down to the Southern Front, and in between, we'll once again stop to take more questions. And then we'll finally wrap up in the Southern Front. We will have no international news today, so after the Southern Front is concluded, we will go straight into answering everyone's questions as much as we can for the time we have left. So, to start off the news today, you may notice that from yesterday's map, the front line around Kyiv has changed drastically. We can see that the Russians appear to be following kind of the supposed battle plan that I came up with earlier, where they're actually trying to move back around the western side of Kyiv and encircle them, which is what is in yellow here. And it appears that today we got enough information to confirm that was true. There have been some discussions that this has been in the process for several days, but I didn't have any video evidence to back that up, and so it was never shown on the map until today, because we actually got news right down here near Lishna and Yablunivka that the Russians were stopped, and the Ukrainians nearly sent them into a rout. I'll show you all the video right here of the damage that was left over from this battle. Sorry for the low quality footage, but we can just see that the battles must have been fierce, because the amount of damage in this one area over such a short amount of time in terms of the battle that occurred, which, as we know, may have only lasted one night, looks like the damage here is as bad as it was in Kharkiv, so, or Irpin even, or really anywhere. And so we may be able to get a good picture that the fighting here was fierce based off the amount of damage we're seeing in the aftermath and the amount of damage we've seen around the rest of the country, even when they have been sieged and attacked with artillery for days or weeks in some places. So apparently the battle down here to stop this encirclement once again must have been biblical. We don't know how large it was, but it appears that from the damage, it must have been large. Also, some more interesting news, and I'm going to cover this as a general thing right now, so that way everyone can get this information and feel a kind of joyous about it. The front line has changed, because we did get information today that the Russians are in fact not on the direct outskirts of Kyiv, like the ring roads that surround most Ukrainian cities. They've actually been pushed all the way back to Mosin, up near Kyiv. We don't know about the eastern side, so the front lines remained unchanged, because we don't have a lot of video evidence to show that there's been a retreat of Russian forces further back. And also down here near the Eastern Front, you can see from yesterday's map that there's been a significant change, but we'll cover that later when we get to the Southern Front. And so to show y'all the proof that the Ukrainians are actually much further north of the city than right on the outskirts, and they're actually in the area of Mosin, here's a video of a Ukrainian soldier in a firefight there today.
Сюда, нахуй. Иди, блядь, снаряжай магазин. Надо поснимай. Поснимай, нахуй.
So we know that they're there for sure, and that's why the front line has changed. That front line actually did not change, because we had no evidence to show that the Ukrainians had pushed them back directly off the city. We had evidence to show that they had pushed them back into Hostomel Bucha Irpin area a while ago, but we never had proof of that today. And so I'm not really sure if this ground that has been made is due to the counterattacks from yesterday, or if they had already pushed them back this far a while ago. But nonetheless, it's great news to see that the Ukrainians have this much wiggle room and this much spare ground that the Russians will have to cover to reach Kyiv again before the Russians can actually start fighting in Kyiv like they were during the first few days of the war. So I believe this is the last bit of footage we have from the front line near Kyiv, and we can see that there has been a UAV attack from the Ukrainians on a motor pole. I'm going to show you all that. It's really good stuff. It's kind of run-of-the-mill, of course. You know, we see the Ukrainians destroying things every day, and so it's practically expected at this point that they'll serve up nothing but excellence. But we can see here that they wipe out another motor pool of Russian vehicles today, like they've been doing for the days prior. So as we can see, this drone is just taking a decent look at the depot itself. It appears to just be in an orbit, and it's just continuously viewing the motor pool. We can see our first evidence of a hit up here in the corner in that last bit of camera footage, because there was smoke rising out of one of the sides of this motor pool, which suggests that there may have been the first hit. And we can see another bit of smoke on another part of the compound, so we know it's actively being bombarded at this moment in the video. Let's see if we can see anything else here in a second. Alright, so it's just panning back over. It looks like we have a bit of smoke, but it looks like it is on the farthest side and corner of the compound. But now we can see multiple explosions happening down there. So maybe they're seeing a group of vehicles that we really can't see too well in the video. Now we saw an explosion once again kind of near this block building. I'm not really sure what kind of building it is. We've seen a second one. I'm not really sure why they're hitting the building. Maybe there's supplies inside of it, but it looks like they're trying to hit the building as much as possible. So whatever's in it, it must be of value. Now they're hitting more in the general area of the motor pole, back on its I'm going to call it the south side. I don't really know which way is north. It looks like maybe another explosion occurred. We can see some more footage here. It looks like now they're starting to hit the vehicles directly lined up at this motor pool. Looks like 2 explosions hit around the vehicles. They may be trying to disable them. And we can continue to see more explosions. We've actually seen one out here in this field, which is interesting. This may actually suggest to me, because it's obvious that a drone can't really carry this kind of ordnance unless they're using multiples of them. But maybe this is an artillery barrage, and this is a drone that can only film and show the damage of the artillery barrage. Maybe it's like a spotter of a sort. But if that's artillery, then they're pretty dead on with most of the hits, because most of them are falling within the vicinity of the depot. As we can see, fires are starting to break out all across the compound. We have at least 2 of them in the camera's view. We can see more hits happening down here. They've hit this spot multiple times. You know, artillery isn't a perfectly accurate thing, but most of the shells just keep on landing in this small area, and it makes me wonder, and thankfully the camera zoomed in, what's down there? So now we can see that it looks like some of the vehicles may have caught on fire. We've seen a small explosion right there that what appears to be some kind of trench work, if that is correctly seen. I'm not entirely sure, but now fire is broken out where the explosion occurred. So now it appears that it's just surveying the damage, maybe. It looks like there's still fires breaking out. Maybe another shell hit there. But nonetheless, it looks like this depot slash motor pool has been severely damaged. It doesn't look like they got all of the vehicles, but they got a decent amount of them, or at least shells hit within close proximity to the vehicles, which could have knocked out their engine blocks and such. So as far as logistics vehicles destroyed, because it looked like this was nothing but logistics vehicles at this depot, they may have disabled a decent amount of them, or at least knocked them out for a short while they have to be repaired. We know that the buildings and the infrastructure within this depot/motor pool has been severely decimated, because we can see that the largest building in the compound appeared to be mostly destroyed. So that's a very good thing, of course, to know that the Ukrainian artillery, if that was the artillery, is working to great effect on that compound. I didn't label this as a UAV attack, but when you look at the video, I'm not really sure if the title on Reddit is correct, because it really looks more of like an artillery barrage to me than a drone attack from what we've seen on footage of what drones have been doing. So with that being said, we're going to move on down into the city of Kyiv, where we've had very little news today. It's been mostly quiet in Kyiv, fortunately, but we did see that there was a massive explosion in Kyiv. We don't know exactly where the explosion was, although we can see it on video, and we don't know if there were any civilian casualties involved. But I'll just show the video. As we can see, the explosion was rather large. I don't know what it was hitting, and we don't know if there were any civilians in that area, but once again, when you're dealing with the Russians, you can probably assume that that flew straight into an apartment block, because that's been the general trend of what the Russians have been doing inside of the area of Kyiv. And so, unfortunately, I'm going to have to err on that side that there probably was, of course, civilian casualties. But hopefully the Ukrainians will get their vengeance eventually and push the Russians back, maybe even a bit further, or start breaking this, once again, attempted encirclement of the city to the west. So we're now going to move on to the area of Chernihiv, where we've had a little bit of news today. Some things as interesting as others. We've seen that more Russian units have been destroyed near Chernihiv. I'm going to show you all that right now. It's always good stuff to see. It's always good stuff to see Russian vehicles destroyed, but it appears that this one was deleted by the moderators. I hate that. That's unfortunate. But once again, y'all didn't really miss out on much. It was just the normal pictures of burnout Russian tanks. You know, it's just a sign that the Ukrainians are still a healthy fighting force. They're able to pack a punch. So now we're going to move on into the area of Chernihiv today, because we've seen that there's been a decent amount of damage in Chernihiv still. We've known this to be the case for about 2 weeks at this point. But once again, here's a kind of like revisiting of the damage from satellite pictures. As we can see here, it appears that there's multiple fires throughout this one area in the satellite picture, and we can also see what appears to be maybe the track yard for a school that has been hit by artillery shells in some places. But what's more important to me is that this residential seeming area has been hit, and it appears to have multiple fires ongoing in it. Hopefully, because we know that Ukrainian firefighters have been working around the clock and valiantly to put out loads of fires everywhere, from the nuclear fire, well, not the nuclear fire, the fire at the Zaporizhzhia power plant, to the fires in Kyiv, to evacuating citizens out of burning and structurally compromised buildings. The firefighters have been working overtime, and while the soldiers are winning this war for Ukraine, the firefighters are making sure that everything behind the front line, and even on the front line sometimes, is staying intact. And so I have to give the firefighters and the police their due credit, because they're doing a whole load and putting themselves in a lot of danger to make sure that what the Russians are inflicting on the civilian population doesn't pan out to be as bad as it could be. And so I have to give them a million loads of support, because it's just crazy how much danger the firefighters go through. I've been trying to get more footage of the police and firefighters in Ukraine. It's very hard to get footage of that, but I did get a little bit more today in Kharkiv, I believe, so we'll visit that once we get to the Eastern Front down towards that direction. And so our last bit of news from the northern area and in Chernihiv is that the firefighters have been working tirelessly to save Chernihiv. Now, this is something I just touched on, and so y'all get the general picture, but I'm going to show y'all this video here and just let y'all see it for yourselves. As you can see, the high-rises have been damaged severely. We don't know the structural integrity of the buildings, although the one previously looked intact. And we can see that firefighters and rescue teams are working to try and recover anyone they can from the building. It's unfortunate stuff to see civilian casualties, and we know that the Russians just don't even care. It seems like it's part of their doctrine at this point, is to just blanket an area with artillery fire or barrages or cruise missiles, and just hope that they're doing something to the military and just disregard the civilian casualties. Once again, I hope that angers y'all enough that y'all call up your representatives, your government officials if you're from around the world, and tell them that we may want to start taking a more strong stance against the Russians rather than just sanctions, and maybe step up our kind of like stance to we may be willing to get involved militarily if this doesn't cease soon. But once again, that's just me. Maybe I'm the only one who's getting aggravated from these videos and seeing this sort of stuff, but let me know in the comments if that's the case with the rest of y'all. And so we've covered everything in the northern front there was. Fortunately, there wasn't much going on there today. We just got a lot of great news about the counterattack stopping the Russian plans in that area today. And so before we move on to the eastern front, I'm going to answer some questions from the chat. And so before I do that, I'm going to introduce someone new tonight. We had Drew, and Drew was a very good support guy for the stream. He was just over the top, and right now he's currently taking a trip with his wife to celebrate their third anniversary. Got to say congratulations to him if he's watching. I'm very, very happy for you, and I hope y'all have a fun time where y'all are. We had Paul last night, but Paul, not to get too detailed, but he had some medical issues and he couldn't be on tonight. And so now we have a new person who may be here to stay, and his name is Matthew. And so everyone give a warm welcome to Matthew. And Matthew, what is the first question of the night?
All right, so good evening, everybody. So our first donation today is from Stephen Mentier. He donates 100 QAR. I'm not exactly sure what currency that is, but Stephen, thank you very much for your donation. Our next donation is from Andrew J., who donates $20. He asks, if Russia keeps going badly, is it possible Ukraine can reclaim Crimea and use their Neptune cruise missiles to destroy Russia's Black Sea fleet?
About the reclaiming of Kherson, I may have to have you read that back to me as two parts because I may forget the second part. But about reclaiming Kherson, well, not Kherson, I'm sorry, forgive me, Crimea. Crimea is something that's a little tough because the Russians actually claim that now as Russian territory, unlike Donetsk and Luhansk, which they say are independent republics. So I believe that if Ukraine was to mount counterattacks and they were successful and they wiped out the land holdings of Donetsk and Luhansk, I don't really believe that'd be too big of an issue. But Crimea is kind of considered a Russian state at this point. And so attacking it in Russia's eyes politically would have to be taken like attacking the mainland, like if the Ukrainians were to begin an offensive towards Belgorod and Kursk. So I don't really know if the Ukrainians, if they started turning this war around and actually started pushing the Russians out, I don't know if they would actually try and push back into Crimea. I'm not really, and really honestly, kind of like my opinion on the war is that the best thing that's going to happen is that the Ukrainians will get a peace treaty, and they'll probably have to agree that they'll stay neutral and join neither side, Russia nor NATO, and then everything will stay status quo for the most part. Is kind of what I'm seeing this war turning out as, which is a huge victory for Ukraine because it's either that or they get subjugated. So it's one or the other. So I don't really think they're going to go for Ukraine. And to answer the question about the Neptune cruise missiles, they may use them. I'm not really a big naval buff, and so I don't really know a lot about the Russian Navy, but we do know that there's a large fleet currently in the Black Sea that we saw last week. It appears to have a landing party and two, I guess you could call them squadrons of support ships. So the Ukrainians may use the Neptune cruise missiles to try and wipe out these assembled fleets in the Black Sea, but I'm not entirely sure about that because I'm just not a naval expert. Maybe the Russian ships have countermeasures that can shoot down Neptune cruise missiles with relative ease. I'm not really sure, and I really can't testify if the Ukrainians would have any success doing that. So I hope I answered that question pretty well, and I thank you very much for the support. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and our next question is from Austin Pack. He says, thanks for what you do. Do you think the U.S. Air Force could be flying drones in Ukraine from a Nevada Air Force base, the same as we do in Afghanistan? Beers on me.
Thank you very much. And also, there's if you're new to the channel, there's kind of like a drinking game where I say that being said, and Apparently, a lot of people are getting alcohol poisoning from it. So I say I have to suggest drink in moderation if you're playing that game. But moving on from that and answering this question, it is possible. Of course, it's always possible that something like that could be happening. But you do have to think if the United States was to do something like that and field drones in that way in Ukraine, the political implications of such a thing is very severe because that would be drawing America directly into the conflict. So I'm not so that while the Americans could actually do that, much like they did in Afghanistan, I don't believe they would actually commit to doing anything like that because that is about as bad or worse than kind of like a no-fly zone in a way to me, because you're not just attacking air forces, you'll be attacking ground forces, which is pretty much which ground forces are what this entire war is about. The air force is there to support the ground forces as well as the navy in a way. So if you're attacking the ground forces, you're attacking pretty much the heart of this entire war is the land war. So I don't really think they would do that, but it is entirely possible and within the realm of possibility that they could. So I hope that answers the question, and I thank you very much for the support. And that, once again, is kind of like my opinion on the matter. It may be a different situation when you actually dig into it, because I'm only working off of public information, so there may be classified information that suggests otherwise. So that being said, I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, so our next question is from Lilith Embers. They say that, with that being said, we're moving on to the next question. And there are looks like some Russian or Ukrainian writing here.
Well, maybe one of the mods could translate that for us so that way we can figure out what that means and maybe respond to that and get back to it in a bit. So thank you very much for recognizing the channel's catchphrase at this point. It's kind of like the unofficial one right now. And so I thank you very much, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and our next question is from Wolfgang Zivgo. He asks, Enforcer, did you see Arnold Schwarzenegger's powerful and moving message to the Russian people? Great job, Enforcer. Fight, 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 Ukraine.
Thank you very much for the support. I'm glad that a lot of people support the channel and also will support it through all kinds of means. I'm just very thankful for it. And so to answer that question, I did see it, but due to how long the speech was, I couldn't include it in tonight's stream. I highly suggest y'all go pull it up though, because I watched the whole thing and it was a very well put together speech. I thought it was one of the best ones I had heard from a celebrity in recent times. But pretty much he was talking about his close connections to Russia and the Russian people, and building up a rapport with Russians who may be watching the video. And then he started saying that the government of Russia was lying to them, and the things going on in Ukraine were not what the Russians were saying is going on. It was a very good speech. It was very well put together and very moving in a way. So I do have to say that I was very awestruck with the speech, because it was just so well put together. And nowadays in really throughout all of history, having great speeches and good public speakers is a very rare thing. And considering that Arnold Schwarzenegger at one point in his life was known for hardly speaking at all or speaking well, it's very interesting to now see him come full circle and he uses the English language like a native speaker. And so I was very impressed with that. I did see it and I thought it was really nice. And so I thank you very much for the question. And with that being said, we're going to move on to two more, and then we're going to start covering the Eastern Front.
All right, so the next question is from Mihavel P. He says, important international news is that Chinese state media started showing civilian victims, and they talk about heroic fight of Ukraine changing rhetoric.
So do you take that as he's saying that the Chinese are changing their rhetoric on state TV?
Yeah, it sounds like the Chinese are starting to talk about the Ukraine. He's not indicating which way they're talking about it, but they're beginning to talk about it on their state media.
Well, at the moment, we do know that they are currently having reporters kind of embedded with Russian units and following them around. So I couldn't really catch on to that question, saying that the Chinese were starting to report on it heavily, or if they were starting to switch sides from what we saw last time when they were reporting, and we saw it here in the West. But to both regards, regardless which one it is, if they are switching sides, I believe they're doing that now because political relations are going to begin to sour once again in between Russia and China, because China has pretty much left them high and dry. The special relationship, quote unquote, that they came up with during the Olympics appears to have just been a farce, and now they've left Russia to fend for themselves, and they've even refused military aid. So if they're switching stories, I believe that's going to become a strategic move to align themselves with the West and make sure that their most powerful economic trading partners are pleased with what they're doing. They may be seeing behind the scenes that there may be some changing tides and maybe demands for sanctions on China, and so they're trying to play the economic situation really well. But we don't really have a lot of information to go off of that. And if you're saying the other thing, which is that the Chinese are just starting to report about it a lot, but they're on the Russian side, that's been happening for a bit. And I don't really follow Chinese media a lot. I just try and follow the videos, the raw videos we get from what's happening inside of Ukraine. So I really can't attest to that much. And so I hope I answered that question pretty well. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the last question, and then we're going to move on to the Eastern Front.
All right, so now we have a message from Stephen Dumont. He donates $100. He says, show of force, unity against the tyranny of aggression and dictatorship. Thank you, Enforcer, and God bless the Ukrainian people.
Thank you very much for the donation. Goodness, I thank you highly for that. It helps out our channel every time someone supports it. And so it lets us make sure, it ensures us that we'll be able to keep on running this channel into the good, well into the future. And so I thank you so much for the support. And yes, I do agree that the Ukrainians are doing well, and I hope that they are blessed as well. As we can tell by this war and how it's going, they must be blessed. And I'm going to kind of sidetrack here for a second, because there's now a need for context. And the context is going to be the American invasion of Iraq in 2003. And I'm going to make this short so that way the people who are here for the news can get back to the news. But everyone just bear with me so that way I can kind of compare how the Russians are doing versus how the Americans did when fighting a quote-unquote lesser power compared to what everyone thought when the war started. The Americans invaded Iraq, and within 3 weeks' time, they had already taken Baghdad, and they pretty much swept through most of the country. It only took them a month to take over the entire country and control it completely, except for Fallujah. But that would be something that happened later, and it really wasn't an Iraqi government thing. It was kind of like a group of people who were trying to step up and kind of take that place. But that's beside the point. It took them a month to conquer the entirety of Iraq. And Iraq actually had a pretty decently sized army during the Gulf War and kind of during the 2003 invasion. And we only lost, let me make sure I get these numbers correct, about the casualties. Invasion of Iraq, 2003. Casualties. And let's see how many American soldiers were lost. So let's see here. We'll get down to the losses. I'm sorry, this isn't the best, but 196 soldiers killed in the entire coalition. We had fielded almost 470,000 troops to invade Iraq with. The Iraqis had 420,000 active members in the military. That is twice the size of the Ukrainian military going into this war that we're currently in right now. And look at the losses that the Americans took. 196 killed, 551 wounded. And so if you were to go off of these kinds of figures and the speed at which we won this war, you can see that was just 1 month and 1 week, and we had taken over the entire country. And we're now into the 4th week in Ukraine, and we don't see the Russians taking any sizable amount of land. As far as I know, this is the only amount of land they've taken as the areas in red. And it's nothing. Like, it's 3 weeks in, they've lost maybe 12,000 people killed, and they've got nothing to show for it. And it looks like it's just going to keep on dragging on. And this is going poorly for the Russians. It's just going terribly, and I think the Ukrainians have a good chance of holding them and maybe pushing them back, as we saw today, little by little, and maybe turning the war into their favor, where they can actually get a peace treaty or some kind of negotiation for peace, where they can step out of this war the victor and actually maintain their sovereignty and their independence from outside influence. So I thank you very much for the support once again, and I hope I was touching base on most of the things that matter in kind of like this degree right now. So I thank you very much, and with that being said, we're now going to move on to the Eastern Front and the location unknowns. We're going to start off with the location unknowns first, because we've had a decent amount of them today. And so the first one that we've got is that the Ukrainians strike a Russian depot. The location of this was unknown, but it is in a snowy area, so we can assume that this is somewhere in between Sumy and Kharkiv. So I'm going to show you all the video. So you see here there's an explosion on the right side, now the center of the base. Now we're seeing multiple explosions, what looks like an ammo explosion perhaps, from one of those kind of like stockade buildings, or storehouses if you'd like to call it that. And so very good hits. We don't know how effective the damage was throughout the entirety of the storage depot. We only saw a small bit of footage. But if the drone continued to destroy it in its entirety, that's incredibly good news, and that'll definitely hinder the Russian logistics, which we already went over a long time ago. And I'm sorry to everyone who's new and hasn't seen that, but make sure to go back and check that out, because it's very interesting to actually see the supply situation of the Russians, which is more important than the actual tank and armor side of the war, because they're in very bad shape. And as more supplies are being destroyed, the worse their situation is going. That's why we see Russians looting grocery stores. So we're going to move on to the next bit of news we've gotten, which is the silence after a battle. It's kind of eerie. It's actually pretty eerie, honestly. I'm going to let y'all watch the video and just keep it silent and let y'all kind of like process how I processed today, how this battle happened. And it must have been hell on earth from the amount of damage that we see on this one road. And now it's just perfectly quiet, and the destruction is over. And whether it'll return here or not, we don't know. But now it's just quiet. It's just really weird when you think about it, that all this destruction and death happened in this one small area, and now there's not even a chirp of birds in the distance. So I'm going to let y'all see the video real quick. It's just really eerie. I mean, like, the only thing you hear was the roar of a jet in the distance. No birds, no nothing. And it's so weird to me that there's just no noise at all rather than a jet. And some people yelling in the distance as they're looking through the wreckage of what they've just wiped out. So moving on from that, we can see that there was a firefight in an unknown location today. I'm going to show you all this right here real quick. Hopefully I can get this full screen. There we go. I don't know what the Allahu Akbar is about, because these are Ukrainians as far as I know. But maybe they're the Chechen volunteers. Who knows? Trying to look for an armband on them real quick to make sure, because I can't tell if they're Russian or Ukrainian at this point.
Хорошо. На проводе. 10.
Алло.
There's gotta be some way for us to find this out, because I mean, they could be the Chechen volunteers fighting for the Ukrainians. I mean, their uniforms kind of look Russian in a way, but they don't have armbands.
Отсюда мы.
Держите, вот туда один смотрим, другой вот в дальний окоп отсюда смотрим. Позиции заняла.
I can't really tell what side this was, because it kind of looked like they were wearing that. Oh man, I forgot what the name of the uniform is, but it's the. Whatever. I'm gonna forget trying to identify it, because I really can't right now. But it looks like a Russian uniform, so I'm not really sure if they're Russian or Ukrainian. They may be the Kadarovites, or they may be the Ukrainian Chechen volunteers, because they were yelling Allahu Akbar, which suggests that they're Muslim. Maybe they're just Ukrainian Muslims. I don't really know. But when I heard that, I was like, wait a minute, are these really Ukrainians? Because there's a lot of Kadarovites currently fighting in Ukraine right now, so I don't really know. So all I know is that was a firefight that happened at Avdiivka, but I could not find that on the map. We know it's in kind of like the Donbass region, but I put in location unknown because it could be anywhere in the Donbass region for the most part. So I'm going to show you all this guy, and I got to say, this guy must have some spirit in him for the country. He lost both of his legs before the war, and now he's out here volunteering to fight for Ukraine, and he's 55 years old. This is, you know, he's getting on up there in age. He's not that old, but, you know, that's for combat, for like the fighting age of an average soldier, he's very old, and he's out here doubling amputee fighting for his country. And I gotta say, I gotta give him credit for going through all this. And it must be kind of difficult for him considering he doesn't have all the motor ability in his legs because they're only halfway there, and he's still old. And he meant that he was going to get out there and fight for Ukraine. And that just tells you that the spirit of the Ukrainian people is very strong, and they're very dedicated to making sure that their country will stay independent now and for the years to come, and they will fight for every last inch of ground to make sure that that's the reality. It's really inspiring, really, to see that this guy is out here like that. And we've got his name, Vasil Shtefko. So if I ever get to find Vasil Shtefko, I'm going to say that he was an inspiration to a lot of people, because it's crazy that he would go out there and do something like this. I got to give him a lot of credit. So now we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, and we can see another destroyed Russian helicopter. I'm going to show you all this. As you can see, it's mostly quiet, but we got the tail section right there. We've got some of the wrecked remains, and it looks like the actual blades are just out there on their own, kind of like on their own area of the field. So this helicopter was absolutely scattered. This may suggest that it may have come down sideways, so the fuselage hit, and then the actual propellers, if you want to call them that, the rotors, kind of just detached from the helicopter and just skid across the field a little bit more. But that's all assumptions and opinions on how this crash may have occurred. We didn't see it, so we're not really sure. But you can just see that there's stuff strewn all about, just like a normal helicopter crash that we've seen. I'm not really sure what that was. It looked like it may have been an ID card of some kind. Maybe. I couldn't really tell too well. We can see just loads of pieces of this helicopter. Just everywhere. It looked, man, I mean, like maybe it exploded when it hit the ground. We can actually see what appears to be some intact ATGMs at the end of that video. But I'm not really sure what those are. I don't really know the exact designation of them because it's like a an SK112 something. It's like a long name, but nonetheless, it looks like the normal ATGMs that the Russian helicopters carry. So we're going to move on to the next bit of news, and we can see that the Ukrainians have stolen another BTR again. This time, it doesn't look like it was a farmer. It looks like it may have been a construction worker. So I guess they're going to be getting a good amount of construction work done in the yard with this thing. Looks like a BTR 60. Just has like the smaller turret on it. Very nice stuff. It's always good to see that the Ukrainian citizenry is going to make sure that they're well armed after this war for anything that may come in the future. Maybe they'll hand these over to the Ukrainian army, and the Ukrainian army will be able to at least negate some of their losses from this war through the captured vehicles that they've gotten from the Russians. So now we're going to move on to this, and this was weird, and we actually had a question about this that I remember from a while ago, and I told someone I couldn't attest to the Russians or pro-Russian forces using Mosin Nagants anywhere in Ukraine, but today we got that proof. And so if you're in the chat and you were the one who asked that question, I found it right here. These Russian soldiers are checking for Nazi tattoos, well, I shouldn't have said on stream, YouTube will probably be coming for me now, but they're looking for, the double Z, they're looking for maybe the double S, anything like that. I guess you get what I'm saying. But nonetheless, this guy is using a Mosin Nagant. I bought one of these at the surplus store for $300, and the Russians are issuing these things. Let me show y'all. It's crazy, really. But here, nonetheless, here it is. There it is. Mosin Nagant. This guy is dressed up like he's in the movie Enemy at the Gates. He's got the cape, he's got the Mosin, he's got everything.
А что, это вы осмотр делаете, да? А? Осмотр сейчас, да, у вас происходит?
And like, what do they do if they find like a tattoo like that on you? Do they like arrest you? Do they execute you on the spot? Like, what's the plan behind this? Like, I guess this is them trying to follow through on that denazification kind of promise that they made at the beginning, but that's just silly. It seems really dumb to go through and almost do some kind of like Stalinist purge of the population and try and find anyone who has a kind of like fascist stuff on them, like fascist stuff tattooed on them. It just seems weird that they would be doing this. Also, what's really weird to me is that this guy does look like Enemy at the Gates with the Mosin Nagant, the cape. Looks like he's got a shush helmet on. I mean, like, he's got the whole 9 yards going almost. He just needs to switch out that shush helmet for correct M41, I believe it was, helmet from World War II, and he'd be in the movie Enemy at the Gates as an extra. And here they go. I'm going to skip through this part again. They're just checking another guy out. Now he's holding the Mosin like it's a small child. And also, it's got the PU 3.5 magnification scope on it, which is interesting to me. So apparently it's one of the Mosins with the curved bolt handle. But anyways, I'm going to cut this short. Y'all get the picture. They're checking literally everybody. But it's just... It doesn't make them look like a serious force, even if these aren't actual Russian forces and this is the Donetsk and Luhansk soldiers. It does not make them look at all like a serious fighting force when you're giving them a gun that's over 100 years old at this point in terms of design. While it still may be effective, would that thing really pair up against an SV-98 or an AK-74 or anything like that? No, obviously. That's why it was replaced. It's dated. And yet they're still using them. And that's silly to me. So we're going to move on to the next bit of news. We can see here that there were some Ukrainian soldiers. These pictures were published by the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, so they're safe to show. They've made sure that these can't be geolocated. But we can see here that the Ukrainians are now switching away, it seems, from the yellow armbands, and now they're going to blue armbands. That may be because the Russians are trying to adopt yellow armbands. They're just trying to make sure that they stay different in terms of appearance. But we can see some pictures from the front, just your average people of Ukraine fighting to defend their country every single day. And it also looks like they do have a bit of different equipment. That looks like American multicam in a way. I mean, I don't know if the Americans have sent over helmets or helmet kind of like covers, but that's really interesting. And then we also have just your standard kit. They're kind of mismatched, but one thing I am seeing a little bit more with them is that at least it's a larger amount of uniformity in being mismatched. Like, they don't have like 1960s Soviet belts on or anything like that. It's mostly modern gear, although different camouflage patterns, which is suggesting that they've probably tacked together this unit really hastily, but they do look like they're well put together and well sorted out. So that's always good to see. So hopefully they do a good job. This may be a TDU. I'm not entirely sure because I didn't have time to translate this stuff on the side. And one of our translators, our most important translator, is currently indisposed at the moment, and I'm wishing them the best with what they're going through right now. And so we're going to move on from that to the last 3 bits of location unknown news we've gotten today, which is that Russian SPGs were wiped out, just completely decimated. You can see them getting hit by ATGMs in this video. I'm just going to show it to y'all. It's pretty amazing stuff right here. So we can see them moving along the horizon. I do not know what the black cross is. I think that was just edited into the video. But there goes the ATGM, just wiggling its way around. Took kind of like a high climb, and then boom, right on top of them. I believe, I'm not really sure what kind of missiles do that. I'm not really an expert on how ATGMs operate. Paul could probably shoot Matthew an answer as to what this may be. He is our ATGM in-house expert in a way, so we may get an answer to that by, oh golly, but we may get an answer to that by the next round of questions. Now I'd like to go back to this one because this ATGM hit and apparently detonated all the ammo in the tank at the same time, because this thing went up like a bomb, like a medium-sized bomb. That's insane. But it's always a good thing. I have to say it every time. It's always a good thing to see that the Ukrainians are giving the Russians a hell of a time trying to invade their country. We're now going to move on to the next bit of news. We can see that the Russians were ambushed in this video by No, I'm sorry, this is actually a different video. They were ambushed in this video, but the one I'm thinking about is the Ukrainians ambushing the Russians with a Humvee. We'll get to that later. But this one is just the Russians, and it appears that they're in kind of like a convoy, and they just start getting shot at. So I'm going to show y'all that real quick. I like how this guy just started setting up his gun and aimed directly at another Russian in the meantime. Just look at this. He's just lining up on this VDV guy for a headshot already. It looks like his finger may also be on the trigger and the safety's probably off. So this guy was just seconds away from being a good friendly fire incident that would have turned this into a live leak. But nonetheless, I mean, it's crazy because look at how grouped up the Russians are, and this isn't standard. Usually in modern warfare, soldiers are to be as spread out as possible while still maintaining kind of like visual contact with each other to make sure they don't get lost and start shooting their own guys because they don't know where they are or they get lost themselves. But these guys, like the Russians, just mean that they're going to have like a group huddle session every single time anything happens in any of these videos because they are all up on each other. This guy's just like 3 feet away from the next guy on the guardrail. But anyways, I'm gonna let the video keep running. Look, and then he aimed at this guy's butt. Like, this guy in a second is probably gonna start shooting and you don't see the rest of the video. He's probably just gonna pop one of these guys' heads off because they're gonna just pop up while he's shooting. And he's just gonna take him out. But anyways. So that's all we got on that video, but we do see that it apparently was an ambush that took the Russians off guard because it looks like they were totally unprepared for it. And of course, that's what an ambush is. It always takes everyone off guard. That's the point of an ambush. But we're going to move on to the last bit of location unknown news, and we can see a captured Russian soldier. We don't get a lot of these videos anymore. I think captured Russians have kind of become a thing of the norm in a way, so they're not really making a lot of news or getting spread around a lot, or maybe there's just not a lot of them anymore. But we can see this one was captured, so I'm going to show you all the video.
Российские пидорасы, гниды ебани. Кто?
Пропуск. Где военный, блядь?
Все.
Сука. Фамилия. Фамилия.
Парамошкин. Да. Имя.
Got some nice IDs right there.
Алексеевич.
Год рождения.
16.04.98.
Откуда родился?
Санкт-Петербург.
Что еще есть?
Все сюда давай нахуй. Ясно. Дальше. Карманы все вывертай.
So that looks like, I'm not going to assume what it, well, I am going to assume what it is. That kind of looks like the sole of a shoe. Like the padding you put inside one, it's got the exact same shape and everything, doesn't it? Let me know in the comments what y'all think about that. If he was just carrying around a random shoe cushion in his pocket, which is just the weirdest thing if that is the case. Let me know what y'all think. That's kind of a little crazy to me.
Не так быстро.
And he's got, I don't know what those are. I mean, I think I kind of do know what they are, but I'm not going to say it. Let me know in the comments if y'all are thinking the same thing I'm thinking about these.
Телефон где твой?
Нету.
Где?
Забрали все.
Удочку да, снимай.
Кто забрал?
Командир.
Как твоего командира звать? Как командира звать?
Капитан Денисов.
Еще раз.
Капитан Денисов.
Вы здесь вчера были?
А?
Вчера здесь были?
Нет.
А где были?
4 дня назад здесь были.
Цепочка золотая?
Это полузолото.
Похую.
Забирайте.
Никто забирать не будет. Ты какого хуя в нашу землю, пидор, пришел?
Меня просто отправили.
Мне похуй. Учения твои не катят. Тут понял, гнида? Ты контрактник, уебок. Ты не срочник. Ты знал, куда ты идешь. Правильно? Ну так и все, нехуй пиздеть. В багажник этого пидораса. Хай покатается трошки, подумай о своим поведением, нахуй.
So nonetheless, it's a pretty explanatory video. They just captured the guy, asked him some questions. It looks like he gave up the name of his commander, a captain of some kind. I couldn't really catch the name well enough to repeat. But nonetheless, another captured one. I don't know what they tied him up with, though. Do they have, like, zip ties around, like the zip tie handcuffs to tie him up with? Because I know that they're not just carrying around, like, metal handcuffs. So I'm guessing they're zip ties or some kind of rope or string. So they'll probably take him to some kind of stockade or a prisoner of war camp, and he'll be there for the duration of the war. Another captured Russian is always a good thing. And so we've covered all the location unknowns, and so now we're going to move on down to the Sumy area. You may notice that today there's nothing here, and as far as we know, the area of Sumy has been largely inactive for most of the war now after the first week and a half. And we haven't been getting a lot of news out of it, and then a few days last week were kind of an anomaly, in a way. And so, once again, we're getting no news out of Sumy. We do know that the city is holding, because they're still destroying vehicles in the area, but we also know that the Russians seem to have bypassed it on some road somewhere, and they're starting to drive down towards Okturka. So we'll have to try and keep a better eye on that and see if we can find any developments on that, see if the Russians are being held at Okturka or Trishyanets, or if they're beginning to be pushed back like they are in most areas of the front. So now we're going to move on down to the area of Kharkiv, where we've had a decent bit of news today. Maybe more news for a single city than the rest of the front as far as today went. But here we can see that an S-27M was firing near Kharkiv. I'm going to show you all this video real quick. Very explanatory. This is one of Russia's heavier artillery pieces. So I'm just going to let y'all see the video. Now, those guns are just huge. I don't really know the exact caliber, but I believe that cannon on that SPG is somewhere in between 170 and 210 millimeters. I'm not really sure which it is, but if anyone in the comments can clarify these... Well, you know what? Nah, actually, I'm going to pull that up right now. I'm very interested in that artillery piece right there, SPG. Let's see if we can find any information. The 2S7 Peon. I'm not really sure which one is. I'm going to say... Peony, we'll say Peony. 203 millimeters, so that's really close, just 7 millimeters off. That is a huge gun. That's massive. Like, good golly. Like, that's, like, 207 millimeters for a field artillery piece. Well, it's not really a field artillery piece, it's an SPG in a way. That's massive. That's like the heaviest artillery you can field most times. I don't really know of any artillery that was getting larger than that, rather than like World War I, World War II, and I believe that everyone started to scale down the size. So I think this is about the largest artillery piece that you can probably field in modern war, and we saw one of them right there. And how many of them do they have? Do we have a number on that? Let's see, we may... I don't think we do. We do not, unfortunately. We don't have an exact number on these. Actually, we may. They have 60 of those. So if the Ukrainians were to destroy just 6 of them, they would have destroyed 10% of the S-27s that the Russians have, which is incredible. This thing is incredibly rare. It's about as rare as that DT-30 we saw last week that was destroyed by the Ukrainians that's mostly used in Siberia. So... You know, who knows? Maybe we'll see a destroyed S-27 in the coming days. Who knows? Hopefully we will. We're going to move on to the next bit of news that we have in the area of Kharkiv, which is that a huge explosion was seen inside the city during the middle of the night. I'm going to show you all this. It speaks for itself. The explosion was massive, of course, like all of them have been so far. The Russians spare no expense when it comes to the extinguishing of civilian lives and the size of the artillery and the bombs that they're dropping. So you can hear it coming in right now. And you can see that the explosion was so large it's actually flung this camera around a little bit. And so you can see that just once again another large explosion hit. We don't know exactly what it was, but it did kind of sound like it was probably a cruise missile, but then again that's an assumption on my part. We didn't actually see it fly in to know if it was a cruise missile or not, but I'm mostly leaning towards the direction it probably was. So we're going to move on from that. We're now going to move on to the other news we've gotten from the outskirts. Y'all may have remembered last week that the Russians appear to have been using Smerches in a higher amount last week, and it appears that that is the same for this week. We can see another Smerch being used outside of Kharkiv, this time in heavy snowfall. And the snowfall is a blessing, because once this thing thaws out, it's already probably in Rasputitsa, but once this stuff really thaws out and the weather warms up over the next month or so, this is going to turn into the worst boggy slush of Rasputitsa that we're probably going to see in the country. So I'm going to show y'all the video. Also, there's another Smerch moving around in the background. And this vehicle over here looks to be the artillery command vehicle, because it has a load of antennas in it, which suggests that it's communicating to the rest of these vehicles. But then again, that's entirely an assumption. It may be another kind of vehicle that's there to support this rocket artillery group. But nonetheless, I'm going to let the video continue. And that's all the rockets it fired. I believe that these rockets are on up there in size as well. I think these are 210 millimeter. But then again, I don't want to give a wrong number, so let's pull up the BM-30 Smerch and let's see what type of size rockets it is launching. So that way we can make sure to say the most informed things. Make sure I'm getting this information correct. General characteristics. See Smerches, there's variants, similar systems. But I cannot see anything about the caliber of the rockets. Caliber 300 millimeter. The rockets are 300 millimeters in diameter. So while the Pion, the S-27, was around 207 millimeters, which is one of the largest self-propelled guns, the rockets on the Smerch are much larger, 300 millimeter. I don't know the explosive yield on that, but apparently the maximum fire range of these rockets is 56 miles. So this thing could really honestly, you could probably fire these rockets from Russia on the border. Let me show y'all. About out here, and they would still be hitting Kharkiv. So we're not really sure if it is here. It could really be anywhere as long as it's within 56 miles of Kharkiv, because that's its maximum range, and it could be anywhere in between. So, that being said, we're going to shut down all those tabs, and we're now going to move on to the news we've seen inside the city. We have, of course, once again, seen no fighting, and it appears that the Russians have been licked enough at the beginning of this war, and so now they've decided that they're not going to engage in any kind of urban fighting inside of cities. It looks like they're going back to their old Soviet ways that they did during the Chechen wars. So, that being said, we can see that a Kharkiv mall has been destroyed. There's two videos that I've seen of markets and malls being destroyed. I'm not really sure if they're the same ones. But you can see here that fires engulfed this entire mall and destroyed everything inside of it. I believe that Bald and Bankrupt actually went into that actual market because it was the largest one in Eastern Europe, and I think he went in that exact area. And, you know, if you want to go watch Bald and Bankrupt's videos, I highly suggest it. He pretty much documented the Ukrainian world, the Ukrainian culture before this war. So if you wanted to see a lot of these locations and what they looked like in the pre-war state, go check out his videos. I highly recommend them. They're very interesting to watch. But now we're going to move on to this other view of a burning market, and I believe this may actually be the same one, but this is a view from further away. As you can see, the smoke is just filling up the entirety of the air. You can hardly see the blue sky in front of them. It's really something. So we're now going to move on to the rest of the news that we've gotten. Hopefully there was no lives lost when this mall was hit and caught fire. So I'm not really sure about that information, though. We'll have to wait in the coming days to see if that turns out to be true. We can also see billows of smoke in Kharkiv. I'm assuming that this may actually be from the same mall, but I'm going to let y'all see this as well. As you can see, the fire is so large, it's blocking out most of the sky, except for a little bit of sunlight coming in up there near the top. It's just, it's crazy how bad wars can get in terms of appearance. This one mall is making Kharkiv in these videos look like a hellhole. I mean, like, it already was a hellhole, that's true. There's really no way I can argue that Kharkiv hasn't turned into a living hell in the amount of destruction that's been wreaked on civilian buildings, public infrastructure, and so on. But this mall burning has just added that cherry on top and making the city look like it's completely desolated, because now this large fire is burning in the middle of it, and now the sky can't even hardly be seen in some areas due to the smoke. So that being said, we're going to move on to the last point that we have in Kharkiv, and this will actually wrap up all the news we have for the Eastern Front, and then we'll move on to the Southern Front, and we can see more damage in Kharkiv. Damage in Kharkiv has been generally seen. I believe this may actually be the same mall as before, because it looks like it was highly filmed, but nonetheless, here's that
Жопа
video.
барабану. Горит. Сука, что разваляхали. Всё. Товар
Look how
закончился.
large the fire is. I mean, you know, it's a very simple thing to just say, look how large the fire is, but imagine actually being around that fire and seeing all this smoke. You can't even see the sky out in that direction. Like, if people are still in the city, and civilians surely are still in that city because they're still evacuating them out of apartment buildings and skyrises that have been hit by missiles and so on, this has got to be just insane to see. This is the type of stuff that you would see in World War II during the Blitz, when most of London was covered in smoke from fires. But it's just insane to see this. So, now that we've covered all the news in Kharkiv, which mostly encompassed that one mall, it appears to be that was the landmark event of today in Kharkiv, was that mall was hit and caught fire. We've now covered all the news in the Eastern Front, as well as the location unknowns up here. And so, now we're going to begin moving on to the Southern Front and cover our last stretch of news that we have for today. But before we do, I'm going to take some more questions from the chat and see what we got. So, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so first off, if you have left a question in the chat, don't worry, I have taken it down and it will get answered before the stream ends tonight. So we're going to start off with Patrick Forney. He puts in $50 Canadian. He says, do you think Russia is sandbagging for later fighting?
First off, thank you very much for the support. It's always, I'm very appreciative of any support given to the channel. And second, I don't really think if you're using sandbagging as a term to say they're kind of saving up their best stuff for later, I don't think that's the case. Because when we looked at the original opening days of this war, and it seems like the evidence now shows that to be clear, and it's not just an assumption anymore, it's almost fact, that the Russians didn't assume that the Ukrainians would last beyond the first day. It was an assumption by them and the rest of the world that the Ukrainians would fall within the first days. That can be backed up by the landing at Hostomel, where they landed 200 VDV airborne troopers without any support. They had no support whatsoever and were expected to hold that field. And the Russians, while the Russians are incompetent, we can see that clearly now, they're not incompetent to the point that they would under-equip a force based off of the amount of resistance they were expecting. So I believe, well, everyone believes at this point, really, even the Department of Defense here in the United States believes at this point, that the Russians didn't actually expect any resistance, and so they thought 200 troops would be good enough to hold that airfield until the rest of the forces arrived, or they could just start airlifting troops straight into that airfield immediately after the VDV secured it, and they'd be able to march straight into Kyiv and take it. And we also saw that later on when they rolled into Kyiv, pushed straight in with hardly a plan, got wiped out, and then pushed back out of the city. We can see that was also suggestive of this war was going to be a short one in Russia's mind. And then we saw that the logistics broke down after a few days, the supplies were falling apart, everything was in shambles, and it all suggests that they expected this war to be over the course of a few days. And so now that we've kind of like laid down that again, in a way, that leads us into saying, are they trying to keep their best units for later? And the answer to that would be no. I think they rolled in their best units first as far as equipment goes. The T90A, the T80 BVMs, the T80 BVs, the Mi-35s, the Mi-28s, Su-30s, Su-27s. I mean, like, they've rolled in the whole kit and caboodle of the best equipment that they've had, and we've seen loads of it get destroyed, and so that's how we know it's there. So going off of that, I actually think they, due to them expecting the country to fall within days, they actually sent in most of their best stuff first. Also because that's just normally how wars are fought. You send in your best stuff to try and win the war the quickest. And they completely underestimated the Ukrainian resistance, rolled in their best stuff first, thinking that it would just be a nice thing for the cameras to show that the best Russian equipment was taking the country, and it would make the Russian army look like it's mostly up to date. And then that all fell apart. So I don't think they're sandbagging in a way for the future. I think they actually sent in their best stuff now, and now they're learning that that was a massive mistake. And so I hope I answered that question, and thank you very much once again for the support. It helps us out a lot. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, next up we have another donation from Stephen Mentier of 100 QAR. Thank you very much, Stephen, for your continued generosity. The next question we have is from W. Dolfio. He donates $100 CZK, and he asks, what do you think about future involvement of foreign PMCs in Ukraine conflict? Could Ukraine hire a company like Blackwater to fight for them, technically bringing U.S. armor directly to the fight?
I believe, I'm not really sure about the international law to this, and I think, if I remember correctly, although I haven't really looked into the history of PMCs much, I believe that Blackwater got into a lot of trouble and may have dissolved. Let's pull that up, though. Blackwater PMC. Let's see, Blackwater Company. It went defunct 7 years ago. So, I mean, like, I see what you're saying. You're saying things similar to that, but I was wondering if they would actually be directly contracted to fight in this war. I think it'd be a possibility as long as the countries that these PMCs are based in allow it. But then that's the question right there. Will the countries where these PMCs are based, like British PMCs, German, French, or American, or Polish, any country that's a member of NATO or anywhere around the world, would they allow the PMC to get involved? And would the Russians start threatening countries whose PMC companies did get involved in the war? That's something that would really weigh in a lot on whether they would be used at all. And then, being used effectively is an entirely different question. They probably would, because they have a monetary incentive to operate as effectively as possible. So I hope that answered the question in a decent way. It's really just entirely dependent on a lot of variables we really can't account for right now, like what the Russians threaten countries that allowed their PMCs to fight, and what these countries in the first place give these PMCs kind of like the permission to go to Ukraine and fight there, because they may actually block them from doing that. So it depends on kind of all those variables, but if we start seeing anything develop in the future, we'll start to get a really true idea of how that would unfold. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers your question to a generally good degree. I'm sorry I can't get a lot of information because we just lack a good answer because we lack so much information on that current subject right now, because nothing about it's really materialized. But I thank you very much for the question, and with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
All right, and next up, Denali Dang leaves a donation of $50. Denali, we appreciate your support. Next up, we have Liberty Dude. He leaves a donation of $20, and he asked the question, do you think we should get militarily involved in Ukraine, meaning the United States? Anyone can go to Ukraine and get involved. Either Ukraine beats Russia now, or we all fight later. World War III is the end of all living things on Earth. Is that our goal?
It's not really like my goal when I say like calling up your representatives and stuff. The goal isn't to call them up and tell them we want blood, let's go to war now. It's really more like my stance is that we shouldn't just be taking economic action against Russia. We should start stepping up and threatening military action, much like we did during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And while that was an entirely different situation as far as the actual events that occurred, it's nothing at all like what's happening, because Russia wasn't invading a country and we were stepping in then. But what's important to remember is that during that time, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the United States found what the Russians were doing to be severe enough that they said, we're going to depth charge your submarines until they surface. And then we did. And we took a very severe stance on the Soviets to stop them from what they're doing. And I think, honestly, because these nuclear threats are a lot like what was being said during the Cold War, I think if we just took a lot more of a strong stance and were willing to actually back it up if we had to and say, listen, we're going to get involved in this thing if this doesn't end in a week or 2 weeks, so y'all need to start working on a peace resolution right now or we're going to step in and get involved in this thing. I believe that the Russians would actually start to heed that, because the Russians know that they're in a disadvantageous position. The only reason that they're still committed to what they're doing is because they have nuclear arms to back up their security for a while. But, you know, to go through the speech I've kind of said multiple nights, just because it's the easiest thing to do doesn't mean it's the right thing to do to not get involved in this war and just let it play out. World War III at this point, because Putin has made it clear that his ambitions go beyond Ukraine, it goes to the Baltic states and Poland, and all 4 of those countries are a member of NATO. And so anything that happens with those countries would immediately get the United States involved. So that's a lot like what Germany said during a certain person's rule back in the 1940s, where they said, we have ambitions to reclaim all lands with German-speaking people and then claim land eastward of that just to have agricultural room. You know, Lebensraum is what they called it. And everyone believed that once he got Austria, and then once he got the Czech Republic, the Sudetenland, and then the Czech Republic, and then puppeted Slovakia, and then made a puppet of Hungary in a way, and then, you know, beyond all that, finally, they said he can't get Danzig. And it eventually led to war anyways. And so sitting back and saying, well, maybe if he gets his way or not on this, maybe we can avoid the situation. Historically, that's just never held up. And that's always been America's stance during multiple world wars. Well, maybe if we just sit back and let this problem try and resolve itself, we won't get involved. And then we sit there and have to get involved anyways because we're drawn into it somehow later on. You know, in World War I, it was the sinking of the Lusitania and the Zimmerman telegram primarily. And then in World War II, it was the attack on Pearl Harbor. And both times we tried to sit those wars out and just say, maybe we can get through this without getting involved. And then we did. We're also the only major hitting world superpower in the world. We're the only superpower right now, that's for sure. The Chinese are trying to step up to that, but right now they're really just a pretty strong world power, really. They haven't reached superpower status yet. The United States is the only superpower in the world. And for us to act like we are the carriers of justice and liberty and the right things and the good cause, you know, we kind of have an obligation to the rest of the world, and especially the Ukrainians, because they were trying to get into our club in a way, you know, NATO. We kind of owe it to them to try and step up and help them out a little. You know, and to not get too far into to this discussion, because I'm going to cut it a little short right here. In 1994, we agreed to a treaty of sorts where if the Ukrainians gave up their nukes that they inherited from the Soviet Union, we would guarantee their independence in a way. And now we can see that we're not really backing up that guarantee we gave them in 1994. So that being said, I hope I covered that question really well. I hope that answers the question and kind of gets like my idea of how this is going hashed out better as terms of as of the big picture in the future. So I thank you very much once again for the support, and we're going to move on to 2 more questions, and then we're going to move on to the Southern Front.
All right, so for the next question is from Tuxedo Kitty with a donation of $20. They say, I watched a Russian drone yesterday when the Tiger crane went into Holland and came back to camp, and it was shot down. Is that going to start World War III?
I haven't heard anything about that, and no one in any political circles has been talking about it today as far as the news has shown up. I actually didn't know about that until now, to be honest. It hasn't popped up on any of the radars because now I'm looking over multiple places and I didn't see that today. So I don't think it will, because if it is, that would have created a large issue. So that's just my opinion. Maybe this just happened like an hour or 2 ago before the stream started, and I hadn't seen that because the news had been updated for today. So I'll check into that and see if that will become an important thing and draw the Western world into war, but we'll have to see. So I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question is from Gandalf TW, who puts in a donation of $20. He says, "Thank you for everything you're doing with this channel. You are raising awareness, which is very important. My Ukrainian wife and myself, my in-laws are also living in Lviv, and my extended family there greatly appreciate it."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that a lot of Ukrainians are getting a decent amount of value out of the news. I've been told at points that it's very hard to get accurate news inside of Ukraine due to the war kind of interrupting normal news services and how they operate, so they're having a hard time keeping that stuff together. And so I'm very grateful that y'all over there are actually getting some value out of this. I actually kind of started this as kind of a thing of concern for a friend I have in Ukraine, and I was hoping that maybe he would watch it. I don't know if he is, but if he is, hopefully he's getting something from it like y'all are. And so I thank you so much for the support. And since we've now covered all of the questions for this little round of questioning, we're now going to move to the Southern Front, and then we'll get back to the questions after we cover the news in the Southern Front. So today, in Izium, we've seen two different videos. We've seen a destroyed convoy, a Russian convoy, near Izium. I don't know if this is a breakthrough convoy or if this is suggesting that the Russians have made it this far. We're going to try and get some more information about that on the map in the coming days as we get more videos from this area. But nonetheless, here is the destroyed convoy of Russian vehicles. Sorry for the grainy footage once again. But we can see that appears to be a BMP-2. Completely destroyed. Very good stuff. Burned out. But you can just hardly see anything because the graphics are so poor. But I mean, like, you really can't complain too much. And we can see what appears to be maybe another BMP right out there. I can't really tell, though. But nonetheless, that's all the footage we've got of that destroyed convoy. And then we also have a little bit more in this video. Actually, this picture. This is a staging area south of Izium. So it's kind of in this area around here heading towards Kamyanka. So I do not know if that suggests that the Russians have bypassed Kramatorsk, because we know they haven't taken Kramatorsk or Slavyansk. So maybe they're just moving up the M03 and they're trying to encircle this eastern area like I've depicted here in this yellow field. That's kind of like my idea of what the Russians are going to do, is that they're going to push from the south and from Kharkiv and try and cut off this large area of Ukrainian forces that are in this eastern kind of like area of the country. But anyways, I'm going to show you all these pictures. We can see here that they appear to have just pulled over for some kind of break. Maybe this is a staging area of sorts, like it says in the caption. And now we can see the artillery slamming it. We can just see fires breaking out, more and more damage to the vehicles and the staging area as a whole. We can also see more smoke rising up from the area. And we can see here in this picture, it appears that they're showing some vehicles in the distance. I'm not really sure, though, because this is in Russian or Ukrainian. I can't really tell which one. They both use the Cyrillic alphabet, so I'm not entirely sure what the differences are in between the languages. But we can see that the damage was significant and that they may have wiped out a decent amount of supplies in that staging area or a decent amount of vehicles. Either way, the news is only good from that. So we're now going to move on down towards the area of Volanovka, and you may have noticed a massive change in the front line from last time, because we were told today by a major amount of news sources that apparently got this information before me, which is a first, that the Ukrainians have won a decisive victory in Volanovka. It wasn't without cost, though. It appears that most of the city was entirely destroyed in this battle, but nonetheless, the Ukrainians have won a major victory in the south, very close to Mariupol. So I'm just saying, maybe they'll push down a highway and maybe break the siege. Hopefully they will. Hopefully they won't have a hard time doing that, because if they could, that means that Mariupol may actually have not held on just to tie up resources, but they may have actually held on with the idea of being saved, which will be incredibly good if that's the case. That's what this marker's about, is the decisive victory, and now I'm going to show y'all some of the footage from inside of Volanovka and the pictures as well. We can see that it appears that Volanovka has been entirely destroyed. It appears that there's copyrighted music, so unfortunately I have to mute it. But you can see the buildings have been burned out. There's just nothing but husks left around the entire area. It's really unfortunate, but the great news is that out of all this destruction, the Ukrainians still hold this city. As far as I had known, they had actually been pushed out of it days ago, and it appears that they've fought back to the city and have now managed to retake it. It's great news. We can see the police out. Looks like things are generally well among the civilians still there. I'm very happy to see that, but unfortunately the damage has just been significant. It's very unfortunate. But really, to be honest, I was thinking about all the damage today, and considering how much the West is supporting Ukraine, you know that their support isn't going to end after this war. They're going to be pumping tons of money, billions of dollars, into Ukraine to help it rebuild. And so while it's unfortunate to see most of their buildings being destroyed now, the Ukrainians might be getting an overall upgrade in their standard of living after the war if the West is to start heavily dedicating themselves to rebuilding Ukraine in some kind of form of a modern Marshall Plan. But then again, that's nothing but opinion. Right now, we just see nothing but destruction, and we don't really know about the future of rebuilding Ukraine. So it may stay this way, or it may get loads better. It may improve drastically, and we may see Ukraine become some modern looking country in every respect, because most buildings will have to be demolished and rebuilt, especially in Volnovakha and Kharkiv. As you see, they're just rolling through and showing more of the damage. Apparently there's a Z on that van. We do know that in this video, the Ukrainians had recaptured the town, so maybe they're commandeering that vehicle and are going to paint over the Z's later. Not entirely sure about that, though. And as we can see, they're just passing on through the rest of the town. But I'm going to pause it there because I think you'll get the general idea of the damage. And to further iron home that amount of damage that we're seeing in that video, you can see a satellite picture of a before and after of Volnovakha. And this is what this roundabout area looked like before the war, and this is what it looks like after. You can see that almost every single building in this picture has been entirely destroyed. Most of the trees are gone, and this roundabout doesn't even look like it's paved anymore. It looks like it's made of dirt. It's terrible to see the level of destruction that wars can cause, but at least the best thing that we can get out of this is that Volnovakha is once again in Ukrainian hands, and hopefully it'll never fall back into the Russian hands again. So now we're going to move down to Mariupol. Currently they are still under siege, but it seems like a decent amount of people have been escaping the city in large car convoys. Although they do face they do face fire from the Russians, it looks like a decent amount of them may be braving it and trying to get out. You see here that they've tied white cloth to all of these vehicles to make sure that they are known to be neutral and not commandeered by the Russians or the Ukrainians, so that way they don't get fired on by either side. Hopefully most of these people can get out safely, although we know the Russians most likely won't allow that if they are able to see them. So, you know, that's another thing. I'm not gonna clue in everyone on this too much, but we've been told that a group of people that are kind of closely related to the server tried to leave Mariupol, and one of them was killed in the attempt to escape. And I don't really want to say too much about it because I haven't really checked with this person in our server to see if they're okay with me sharing the story. But just want you all to know that although that convoy is clearly marked, apparently they still got shot at by the Russians. And so if you're ever thinking that the Russians may actually be nice people mixed in between them, apparently the evil people are a little bit more pronounced, or maybe there's more of them than the good people in the Russian army. And so just think about that when next time you think about the Russians just being poor little pawns in a big man's war in a way. So anyways, we can see that there are DPR fighters inside of Mariupol. Show this right here. Okay, so I'm going to assume that the location unknown video earlier that said they may be Chechen fighters, that must be true because we're seeing these wear the same uniform here and they're confirmed to be Russians.
Попадает сюда. Внимательнее. Выходь.
But this guy's a terrible camera guy. Actually, this video is so bad. Like, he doesn't ever stabilize it, and he doesn't ever clean off, like, the gunk on it. Okay, wait a minute. Yeah, this is that video from earlier. So now we actually have a confirmed location. It's Mariupol. These are DPR fighters, maybe Chechen volunteers in the DPR. I'm not really sure, but they were chanting Allahu Akbar. So who knows? We're going to move on to the next bit of news in the area of Mariupol, where we can see that Russian forces are also involved in Mariupol as well. We can see in this picture, this appears to be maybe a BTR-60 or some vehicle much like that, and you can see the city destroyed in the background behind them. We don't know. Also, we can see here, now this is something. This car was marked with the white cloths that we saw in the other convoy of cars that was trying to escape. And it appears that the front window has maybe been shot. We can't really tell, but it looks like it has been damaged severely. And then a Z was put on the vehicle. So that's an interesting thing to see there. And I'm not really sure what has happened and what's the story behind that. But I bet that we can all get a little imaginative and maybe come up with a lot of assumptions as to what may have happened during that right there. We can also see what appears to be a blue car in the background that's marked with a Z. I don't know if the Russians are using that for logistical purposes, but one can only assume that they may be. So we're now going to move on from that. We've covered all the news in Mariupol today, except for this news here, which is that the mayor of Mariupol has stated that around 80 to 90% of the buildings in Mariupol have been destroyed, meaning that they are to such a state of damage that they'll have to be demolished after the war and entirely rebuilt. That's a large amount of damage. As you may know, that means that almost 9 in 10 of all the buildings in Mariupol will have to be torn down and rebuilt at the end of this war, which gives you the idea of the scale of damage that the Russians are inflicting on this city. And it's terrible. Hopefully, though, the Ukrainians can hold this city, because a lot of people, including myself, believe that if they're able to hold this for quite a while, this may actually be the turning point in the war for the Ukrainians, and they may be able to break through to the city and reconnect it to the rest of the Ukrainian lines. But one can only hope, and one can only dream that will be something that will happen in the future. We're now going to move on to the area of Kherson, where we've seen a couple of developments today. We can see Russian special forces in Kherson, and it appears that they're looking for someone inside of an apartment block. So we're going to take a look at this video. It's sped up heavily, but it looks like they're clearing this block, and they've got riot shields and such, which suggests that they may be trying to breach into an apartment and arrest someone or find them. But we don't know who, and we don't know why. So it looks like they're all just hanging around. They're just waiting for whatever they're doing to go down, and then hopefully capture this guy and bring him out and maybe throw him in a van. But it looks like they're all just kind of casually waiting. It looks like it's taking a long time, and then we don't see the end result in this video, unfortunately. But nonetheless, it was very interesting. We don't know who they're looking for, but we do know that they've been snatching people up a decent bit. They actually kidnapped the mayor of Melitopol, and now he's been released. And now that he was released, I couldn't put this on the news, we just had too many points to cover today, but Zelensky actually met him and gave him a medal for his bravery because he didn't give up any information to the Russians, which was very impressive. And it was also very neat that he actually came back out, because I don't know if a lot of people who have been kind of like secretly arrested by the Russians and have come back out from that arrest in captivity. I believe the Russians did that for him because it was highly publicized around the entire world that they just nabbed him up off the street pretty much. Now the next bit of news we've seen in Kherson is projectiles. We're not really sure if these are surface-to-air missiles or rockets, well, unguided rockets, but we can see 2 of them being fired here into the night sky. Not really sure what they are, but it's interesting nonetheless. So now, due to how the schedule of how this video unfolds, we kind of saved the best for last for today, and I have to say, the news just hasn't gotten better. Well, the news has gotten better. It's gotten a load better. You may remember the other day that the Ukrainians had mounted a counterattack near Mykolaiv, and they actually pushed the Russians back a decent bit and started to capture a lot of gear. now today from the videos we've been able to see, it appears that the Russians have been pushed almost halfway back to Kherson, because we can see that a Russian convoy of units was destroyed on the road in between Mykolaiv and Kherson, and it appears that they were destroyed because the Russians were being pushed back. So I'm going to show you all the video. It's kind of a little long, so I'm going to skip through it a little bit, but nonetheless, let's get to it.
Херсонську область. Херсонська область звільнена вже частково. Перші кроки ступили по Херсонщині. Окупант нахуй звідси винести. Друзі, дивіться, це касетний снаряд, бомба.
I'm not sure what that is, but it sounded like he said it was a bomb.
Хірачить от такими касетними бомбами, друзі, а це повне порушення.
And we can also see he's Ukrainian, okay? And this is what's telling me that since it was near this village, and he's a Ukrainian just driving through it, obviously the Russian forces must have been wiped out and pushed back from Mykolaiv. So that's where I'm getting this idea that they've been pushed halfway back to Kherson from, because this came out today. And if that's the truth, if this is the case, that means that in one area of the front alone, the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back nearly 7 miles, or maybe even more, because this video was taken at Posad Pokrovsky. So, nonetheless, we're going to get back to the video.
Правил ведення війни і конвенції. 8-ма окрема механізована бригада імені лицарів зимового походу звільнила це. Причому звільнила декілька днів тому.
We can see that they're wandering around the village.
Мы добровольцы, мирские жители, я вам объясняю.
And now we're going to skip forward to the end. You see the destroyed convoy in the background.
Нашої славної Миколаївщини та славної Херсонщини, друзі. А оце залишки колони Русні, які
We see here that this was a Russian vehicle that was destroyed. It's marked with Z's all over it.
і буква Z. На це работает украинская артиллерия. Красиво. Друзья, и вот еще БТРД.
We can see what appears maybe to be a BMD-4.
Смотри, смотрите, какое Z.
But we do have enough here to show that the Russians were destroyed here, and they may have even been pushed back further to Kherson, but we don't have any video evidence to support that yet. And so, as of the last update, the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back as far as Posad Pokrovsky. So, now that we've covered that, we're going to cover the last bit of news today, and that is in the city of Odessa, where we can see that citizens are preparing to defend the city. I'm going to show you all this right here. As we can see, it appears that they have an instructor telling them how to put on the body armor, the helmets, and maybe use the weapons as well. And then this is just a loop of that video once more. But it's always good to know that the Odessans, if the Russians do invade, they will defend that city down to the last man and the last woman, the last civilian. While other civilians in other areas have been somewhat helpless, due to a lack of supplies, and also because not every civilian needs to get involved in a war, but we can see that the Russians don't really care if they have a weapon or not, they're going to kill them. Hopefully that won't be the case in Odessa, and practically the entire civilian population can be mobilized to defend the city in the event of an invasion, a naval invasion near the area, or the highly unlikely breakthrough at Mykolaiv, since the Russians have been pushed back so far, where they could push on to Odessa over land. So, now that we've covered all the news today, we have gotten through the entirety of the deal. And so, I'm about to answer some questions, but before I do, how many do we have, Matthew? How many super chats do we have?
We have quite a lot. I believe we have about 35 to 40 to cover.
All right, so I'm going to have to cut off the super chats right here. If you would like to donate beyond this point, if you are donating, we won't be able to get to it most likely because we have a large backlog tonight. And so we're going to try and get these answered. Also, if you would like to get your question answered, and, of course it is tough these days because there's so many super chats, and we always like to help give everyone an answer that is supporting this channel because it means a lot to us, and so we want them to get some kind of worth out of it. If you would like to have a question answered and you're thinking about putting it in a super chat tonight, make sure to put it in a super chat tomorrow night, first thing, and we'll get to it as soon as we can. And once again, I thank you all very much for the support. It means a lot to this channel that y'all are helping us out to keep this thing running. And so we're going to start with the first question.
Okay, so first up, we have Mike Smith coming in strong with a $150 donation. He says, Jameson Fund, relax.
Golly. Well, I thank you very much for the support, man. That's huge. I mean, golly, thank you. I thank you very much, man. That means a lot to us at the channel, and I'm speechless, really. We get donations like that here and there, but it's incredible to always get one that large, because it means a lot to this channel and it helps us out a great deal. And so I can't thank you enough. I thank you so much. And also Jameson Fund, yeah, that's a good one. I like that. So that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, so for the next question, it comes from M4SL, puts in a donation of $20, and they say, when they were looking for Nazi symbols, do you think that is due to propaganda? And do you think the soldiers are acting on that misinformation?
I think that may have actually been an order from a commander, maybe. I mean, like, this is my opinion. We don't really know the actual breakdown of what happened, but I think a commander was like, hey, we need to start trying to get something for propaganda footage back home. So start just lifting up their shirts and trying to find something so we can arrest some people and say we're achieving what we came here for. I believe it may have been something like that, but then again, it may be entirely due to propaganda, but it would be kind of weird that the soldiers are acting on their own without orders. Just on the propaganda that they may be fed by the Russian government. So who really knows? It could go either way. I could actually see it going that way as well in some instances. But I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
Okay, so for the next one, this one comes from Mark Bohachuk. And Mark, I appreciate you putting that pronunciation in the comment. That was very helpful. He leaves 2 donations, one $5 Canadian and one $8 Canadian. And he says, coffee money.
Thank you very much. At this point, everyone, Bo Hychuk, if I got that right, he has pretty much been running the coffee fund every day, and he puts in enough money for us to get coffees here on the channel, and so I thank him very much. I'm looking at trying to get coffees to the rest of my team, but they're kind of scattered all around the country, so I've been looking at pouring coffee into envelopes and just sending it via U.S. mail. But we're still looking into that. But I thank you very much, Chuck, for the coffee money. It means a lot to us. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question is from George, New York's premier contractor, putting in a donation of $10. He says, we shall see Ukraine offensive very soon. However, Mariupol and Donbass might be exchanged unless Zayulu gets removed. I pray for my relatives in Mariupol and Kharkiv, excuse me.
I do as well, and you've also been a repeat donor here. You've actually been one of our largest donors, I believe, and so I thank you very much for the support. You've been continuously giving it to us, and it means a lot to me because, you know, once again, it helps me run the channel, and it helps me make sure that this can keep on going as kind of like a job, and I can make sure to deliver all the best information to you. So I pray for your family as well. I really pray for all Ukrainians and hope that they're safe. I pray for my friends and the people I've met in the process of doing this that have family in Ukraine or live in Ukraine. I pray for them all. And so I entirely agree with you. And I hope, I really hope, honestly, that the Ukrainians can keep a handle on this southern area, kind of like the southeastern area of the country, because it looks like it may be getting questionable. But the Ukrainians have been managing to pull miracles throughout a decent bit of this war, and hopefully they can pull another miracle on the Marne kind of thing down here in the southeastern area. So I thank you very much once again for your continued support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and next up we have a question from Ashley Hope, who puts in a donation of $10. She asks, you mentioned contact your representative. Which representative do you recommend for a United States citizen? Governors, senators, representative, local delegates, etc.
Considering that this has to do with foreign policy, usually state governments aren't the best ones to call in this regard, because the federal government is usually the one, usually federal government officials are usually the ones to push foreign policy initiatives. And so I believe that the best people to call up would be your representatives and senators. I believe that that would be the most effective way to call. And make sure, you know, like, make sure to just have all of your relatives, if you really believe in this, like, encourage them to call as well, so that way there's just a huge volume of calls, and it shows that there is a huge amount of support for what we're saying. And, you know, once again, I say, you know, the goal wouldn't be to go to war, but the aim of it would be, if we're wanting peace, you prepare for war. That's a famous quote by Arthur Wellingsley, I believe, or Horatio Nelson. I'm not really sure which one, but I believe one of those Napoleonic leaders for Britain said that. But nonetheless, if you want peace, you do have to prepare for war. And so we should have our senators and representatives and most of our federal government officials on the same page that we need to show a message of power and strength militarily to Russia, to show them that we're not going to just send economic sanctions their way. We may actually be sending lead their way as well in the future. And I think that that'll start getting the message across of how displeased we are with what's going on. But I hope that answers the question. And I hope that works to great effect. And I hope I actually have a lot of reach, telling people to call up their representatives and senators, and we'll hopefully see some changes here in the near future. But that being said, I thank you very much for the support once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, we have a question from WRP. He asks, would Egypt let that supply convoy in the Sea of Japan through the Suez Canal?
We're not entirely sure. They may not. We don't really know at this point, because I don't believe the Egyptians have said anything definitive about denying that convoy, that kind of like small fleet access to the Suez. But if they do, that's going to run a huge problem for this fleet, because they'll have to sail all the way around the Horn of Africa, back up to the north, and then pass through the Gibraltar Strait. And then even at that, it's like, will someone try and deny them passage through the Strait of Gibraltar? And I don't really know if anyone has the legal right to deny them passage, but if they can, that means the Russians would be entirely cut off, and their naval power would just consist of what they have in the Black Sea and the Mediterranean already. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
All right, and the next question is a very good question from 21st Century. They ask, do the projectiles have explosives in them, or is it just the force of the impact that causes all of the fireworks?
It depends on what kind of what kind of projectile it is, but most of the time the answer to that is yes. Usually they have some kind of explosive content in them, especially when you start getting into the larger caliber projectiles, for sure, like a 207 millimeter artillery shell or a 300 millimeter rocket. All of those will have some kind of explosive yield inside of them. That's really standard nowadays in modern war. You don't really see a lot of dud shells. That's kind of something that you saw pre-World War I, where it would just be like a large iron chunk, and they were just firing at something. But even in the Civil War and beyond, they were already sort of developing explosive charges and that they were using like bombards and stuff like that. But to answer the question, yes, I believe that most, if not all, modern projectiles do have an explosive yield inside of them, of some degree and some size. So I hope that answers the question. And by the way, 21st Century, I thank you so much. You've been a repeat supporter of our channel as well, and it means a lot to me that you continue to support our channel, because it helps us out a lot here. And so I thank you very much for the support. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, the next question is from DR with a donation of $10. This individual asks, why doesn't NATO sign a peace and non-aggression treaty with Russian Federation and ask Russia if they would like an open door to join NATO in the future if Russia pulls out of Ukraine?
Well, the thing is with that is that Russia joining NATO would very much limit their own interests around the world. For example, Russian interests usually just don't align with NATO interests. For example, they kind of have a vested interest in countries in a different way than the West. Like in Syria, they're completely on the opposite side of the spectrum from the United States. They support the Assad regime, we support the SDF, and those are literally the antithesis of each other in Syria. Around the rest of the world, that's just been the case for as long as time goes on. And so for right now, even just discussing that one like topic in Syria, they wouldn't be happy to join NATO. Even if that offer was given to them, it wouldn't be something they'd ever consider, because their political interests and their diplomatic interests are just completely different than the West's, and I believe they always will be. So I hope that answers the question, and I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question we have is a $10 donation. I cannot say this person's name because it is written in a foreign language, but I'm going to put it in the chat. They ask, or they rather state, the guy in the long video in Ukraine uniform is a Ukrainian congressman.
Ah, okay. Thank you very much for the clarification, and thank you very much for the support as well. And so we're going. That being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next one is from Andrew Lardner. He says, please don't mention my name for the previous super chat, but just say thanks to Alabama. How about not calling it a no-fly zone, but a special air operation for humanitarian movement?
Yeah, that's pretty good, using the Russians' own play on words against them in a way. But yeah, thank you very much for the support, and also thank you for mentioning Alabama. That's my home state. That's where I come from, and they're also the ones producing a decent amount of the CLUs in Troy, Alabama. So that's a really interesting little tidbit of information. But once again, I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
The next question is from Anaya with a $10 donation. They ask, looking at how the Russians are bombing anything they can, what do you think NATO will do if an inch of NATO's land gets bombed or shot if there is a battle at the border? Keep up the great work.
Thank you very much for the support. But that is a great question. It's been asked multiple times, but it never loses the actual validity of the question just due to the amount it's been asked. I've always said, and this may not be true, it may be that any bomb or ordnance that falls on NATO territory like Poland and explodes will be treated the same regardless of what it hits. But I've always said that NATO isn't going to be eager to go to war, and so if it hits like in the middle of a farm field and it just, you know, creates a crater or it kills a cow, they're not going to make a big deal about that. But if it lands into like an area like a house or an apartment block and it kills civilians, then that of course would be a huge deal, and that would immediately probably draw us into a discussion on Article 5 here in NATO, and may lead us directly into the war. But we never really know. You know, it could be that that a bomb could be dropped on NATO territory, and then we just do nothing, regardless of the outcome of what happened because of it. So that's kind of my opinion, though. But I believe I'm going to still go with what I originally said, is that it will kind of depend on what it hits and where. And that will kind of dictate the Western response to what has happened in terms of that explosion on, you know, NATO soil. So, once again, I thank you very much for the support, both monetarily and also, you know, vocally. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, so Knuckles asks, wanting to know if you've seen my direct message to you on Discord. I don't want to say too much here out of respect for your channel. If you did want to know, though, please check the Discord. Keep up the good work also.
Got you. Thank you very much for the support. I'll try and check it out after the stream, because I don't want to pull up Discord in the middle of the stream. There's some stuff on there that I would like to try and keep confidential because of some things about how this channel is run and such. But I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to check that out for sure after the stream. So that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the Frost Wolf says, appreciate the hard work. That Ruski looked like he had a pack of condoms.
That's what I was thinking. I didn't want to say that, but that's exactly what I was thinking. It looked like he was expecting to get laid. It looks like his plans were thwarted a little bit, and it looks like, you know, maybe he'll have to watch out for that when he drops the soap in POW camp. But yeah, I was wanting to say that, but I didn't really want to say that because I wasn't entirely sure. But I'm glad that someone agrees with me that it looked like he got the Trojan extra smalls. And so I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, I'm going to combine two donations into one. They are both from Caffeine. Caffeine says, what did you think of the Schwarzenegger and the use of celebrity and appeal in general?
So I don't really want to give my opinion on this, but I'll give it a little because it's a good question. I don't really think celebrities' opinions mean much in most cases, but Arnold Schwarzenegger and his kind of history of who he is in our like history of the country, you know, he's a big pop star, and he was an Austrian who actually served in the Austrian army, you know, defending Austria from the Eastern Bloc. During his time living there, and then he came to the United States, became a governor, and got heavily involved in politics. He's not the average celebrity per se, because he actually does have a political background, regardless whether you think it was a good one or not. That's up to y'all to decide. But I believe that, unlike most celebrities who just say something like, oh my god, this is terrible, he had like this beautiful speech that he made about it, about how he has dealt with Russian people, how he knows them, and how he really likes them and appreciates them as a people. And then he went on to talk about how the Russian government is doing this for their own interest and is lying to the public. And I really think that in his regard, I'll make an exception to me generally believing that celebrities weighing in on anything is useless, because that speech was just very well put. And I believe that even if it doesn't do anything, it was extremely comforting and just just so well put together. It was a great speech to people in the West who may be looking for stuff like that. So I actually thought that was, in a rare exception of celebrities coming out and saying something, very well thought out and very intelligently put. And so I hope that answers the question. And thank you very much for the support once again. And we're going to move on to the next one.
All right, so we have about 23 more to get to before the stream ends. So I'm going to start back with Mark Standers with a £5 donation. He says that multiple explosions in the forest looks like a mortar attack I saw using a drone for focus firing.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking as well, is that they were using the drone to kind of like zone in well, not really zone in, but make sure that the artillery was on the mark as far as what they were hitting. So I don't really believe that they had like a fleet of drones just dropping bomb after bomb on that depot. I think it was just them trying to kind of like hone in the artillery to be more and more accurate, because we saw some outlier explosions further off in the fields, and they kept on getting more and more accurate as the video went on. So I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and I just want to give a quick shout out to Anthony Smith with a $10 donation. Anthony, we do appreciate your support greatly. And the next question is from CG in Texas with a $5 donation. Do you know if the dam that Ukraine built to finish or to prevent fresh water from making it to Crimea after Russian occupation is still up?
We do know that that was actually destroyed very early on. The Russians made a big deal about blowing it up because they're wanting to make it look like they're helping out the people. And so they blew it up, and then the water was returned to the Crimeans, and everyone, the Russians on state media were like, oh, rejoice, we did it. So yes, I do know that that dam was in fact destroyed, and it is on a video. I just don't ever think I showed it in stream. So you can find that out there somewhere on the internet, because it was a very early war event. And so I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers your question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
All right, the Jaded Kriegsman asks, how long would Ukraine have to agree to remain neutral for? No agreement made in perpetuity ever lasts. And would that just be for NATO or the EU too?
I believe that if they declared their neutrality, I believe it would just be for military alliances like NATO, and they'd be free to join economic alliances like the EU, although the EU is kind of starting to form into a military alliance as well of European countries. But I feel like that's kind of redundant if that's the case, because NATO kind of does that already, but that's getting beyond the point. I believe it would just really extend to military alliances, and they'd be free to trade with whoever they wanted and join any economic trade partnerships that they would like to, because that really doesn't do anything to put Russia at a strategic disadvantage, nor the West at a strategic advantage nor disadvantage. It just leaves everything status quo, kind of like it was before the war, when Ukraine wasn't really aligned with either side, and they were just there. So I believe that that's most likely how they're going to try and dictate the neutrality, and I believe that they would try and make it something in perpetuity, at least a very long time, like like the British used to do the 99-year leases. I think that this would be very similar, but once again, politics change and things change, so you could see in like 20 or 30 years they go one way or the other. They join the Russians or NATO, depending on how things unfold in the future. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers your question, and we're going to but real quick, before I move on to the next question, do we have any super chats that were just support to the channel without really any comments?
We do. We have one from M. Adams for $5. We do appreciate that very much. The next one we have is from Chris Ledbetter. We appreciate the support. And most recently, we have one from Kang Tran for $5, and we definitely appreciate the support. Thank you all for supporting the channel. And I'm going to get back to our next question, which is another question from Mark Standers. Mark, we definitely appreciate the support. And he says, it wasn't just America that invaded Iraq, and more British soldiers were killed by Americans than by Iraqis.
Yes, but the thing is that I did look over those numbers. Some people have brought that up before, and it's kind of like a thing like, oh, the Americans were poorly trained. Like, the amount of British soldiers that died to American-friendly fire was like 13. And a huge war with hundreds of thousands of people, and I didn't really include the British in that figure, because the Americans had 470,000 soldiers nearly in the invasion, and the British had 45,000. So while it was sizable, it was only about 10% of the size of the American invading force, and that was the next largest coalition nation that joined in this conflict. So I get what you're saying, but I do have to disagree with the idea that, you know, the Americans were like some kind of like slaughterhouse and they were just killing everyone everywhere, and, you know, they inflicted a whole load of casualties on the British because it was something like 13. And so if that's more casualties than they received in combat, that's not really that bad, really. I mean, like, you know, 13 people killed to friendly fire is not bad at all, because if you look at what happened in Iraq, hell, I think the Americans killed maybe more than that of their own, you know, of American soldiers. Because I remember watching a video of an Apache attack helicopter that wiped out like an entire American like signal unit, just wiped them out, and shot the people trying to run away with like the 30mm gun. So I know that friendly fire is always a case in wars, even if you have a highly trained military. But I think that that fact is trying to portray a bit of a different story than what the usual story in war is. But I do thank you for the support, and I guess we'll just have to agree to disagree there. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, we have about 15 more comments in the queue. The next one is from Zach Jeffers. He says, "Thanks for the coverage. Been watching the streams for a little bit now."
Thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad you've been watching for a bit. We have a lot of return viewers now, and I'm very happy that a lot of people find the content good enough that they always come back and get this news daily. And that was like the kind of like one of the main goals of the channel as well, is to make good enough news that people would actually come back, and it's not clickbaity, it's just the truth. We don't try and like paint a picture, we just try and maybe assume what the picture would be based off of what we got. So I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
The next one is another comment from Mihavel P. He says, "The deputy chief of Roskvadia, General Roman Gavrilov, was fired today."
I did not hear that, and if that's the case, I think that's the 9th general that's been removed from his position in this war. We know that 8 of them were removed in mass a while ago by Putin, and now we have a 9th one. And so this is suggesting, you know, this is clearly suggesting that things aren't going to plan, or else these generals wouldn't be removed. So that being said, I thank you very much for the support, and I'm very thankful that you brought up that info to us. We're going to check that out after the stream and maybe see about adding that to tomorrow's news. So I thank you very much for that, and we're going to move on to the next question.
The next one is from Doug Sharp. He says, "Please explain your map notations. What are the green and yellow areas? What are the orange and purple lines? And I suggest repeating the key nightly for noobs."
Got you, and I thank you very much for bringing that up, because sometimes I don't. There's also a legend up here in the corner of the map if you'd like to go click on the link in the description, and it explains everything except for the yellow areas, because the yellow areas are a very new addition. But the green and yellow areas suggest areas that the Russians want to control. These are major roadways and areas that would start cutting off the Ukrainians from a large amount of supply. So those are the areas in yellow. The green ones are like the first day objectives that I believe they probably wanted to achieve on day 1, and the yellow ones were made last week as kind of like a D-Day +1 kind of thing of what they're probably wanting to do beyond their day 1 objectives. So what I was thinking is that they're probably going to try and sweep through the southwest down here, through Kryvyi Rih and towards Dnipro, because they'll be able to encircle Kryvyi Rih, besiege Dnipro, and then the forces down here in the south could move up and completely encircle Zaporizhzhia, where it's in its own bubble, along with Kryvyi Rih, and then bypass Zaporizhzhia on up to Dnipro, and you would have this giant pocket of 3 major Ukrainian cities that are all really trapped and don't have any resupply availability to them. So that was kind of like the whole thing down here in yellow. This area up here is just kind of like a redrawn area of how the Russians are probably going to try and besiege the Ukrainians. They're probably going to try and go to Zhytomyr at some point and capture that, because then they'll control the E40 a little bit further away from Kyiv and maybe in a weaker spot of the Ukrainian defenses. But this is all assumptions and opinions. It turns out that they're usually accurate to a large degree, but, you know, I'm never going to boast about their accuracy and say these are entirely perfect and this is what they're doing, because they might do something different. But I thank you very much for the question. Also, the red lines are the front lines. This is Russian-controlled areas. The maroon lines, the purple ones, I guess you could say, are areas where Russian breakthrough convoys have been seen, but we're not really sure if they've taken the land yet. And we're still trying to get information about that near Troyestinets and Perluki. And then the green areas, once again, are just the first day planned objectives, which they haven't achieved yet. Also, the green markers are all the day 22 events, and each day each day has different colors for the markers, and they're always notated up here in the top in the legend. So make sure to check that out if you'd like a good description on what's on the map. And I thank you very much for the question once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, so next up we have 3 super chats from Fuzz the Cat for a total of a $15 donation. I'm going to sort of summarize these 3 into one because it's essentially one question. They ask, what are your ideas on how to punish Russia for its inhumane invasion after Ukraine wins? The first option being to keep all sanctions in place indefinitely. The second option to be have all Russian soldiers show their own families their own inhumane handiwork. Or the third option to only lift sanctions after more Russians are toured through the horror they inflicted and agree to pay reparations and do a regime change.
I believe that the second option and the third option would be generally unattainable because there's really no way to kind of enforce that. But the first one is very simple and will probably be the route that the West takes, is to just continue sanctions after the war is over. That's really the only one I can see happening, and so I hope I answered that question. I know it's kind of short, but to me, that's like the only thing that the West could do to punish Russia on further, because the other two would really have to require like some sort of Western control over Russia to make sure that that's enforced, and that's probably not going to happen anytime in the future. But I thank you very much for the question and the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, the next question is from Russell. He says, I saw a pic of Russian Pacific Fleet ships voiceover said that they were amphibs, assault ships. One close-up was an amphib deck was covered with supply trucks.
Yes, I did see that earlier today, and I mentioned that at the very start of the stream, so a lot of people weren't around for that. But we don't know where they're heading, but we do know that they are loaded down with equipment, you know, trucks, tanks, so on. But we do not know where they're heading. We're assuming that they're going to sail through the Suez Canal into the Black Sea, further on up through the Mediterranean. But we don't really know what the goal is of sending these ships anywhere, because it's so inefficient, you know, because they're having to sail pretty much like halfway around the world to get to Ukraine from where they've started off. But nonetheless, that's really all I know about it right now. We're going to keep on tracking that and see where it's heading, and maybe try and get some more information about that in the future. But I thank you very much for the question and the support, and we're going to move on to the next one.
All right, and next up, Matthew Muller leaves a comment and says, I feel you are greatly underestimating the cost of a nuclear exchange between NATO and Russia. Sometimes the tough decision is not to take direct action.
I actually do know what nuclear war would entail, but the thing is that World War II entailed a lot, and that was back then what everyone was saying. It's always the tough decision, just sit it out and let whatever happens happens. And then we still got involved anyways. And I feel at this point, regardless whether it turns into a nuclear war, we're going to get drawn into this somehow, some way, because the Russians have made it clear that Ukraine isn't their only ambitions. And if they say that now, you're guaranteed that they'll carry through on that sometime in the future, whether it be months or years from now. And so I think we're going to get drawn in either way. And so regardless how severe a nuclear war is, it's just an accepted matter of fact. If this is going to happen, that's also coming with it. So I thank you very much for the support. And yes, I do know what nuclear war involves. I mean, it's not like I just think that it's a small bomb or anything. You know, they can level most of a metropolitan area. So nonetheless, thank you for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, next up we have a comment from Taras Shevchenko. They say, when can we expect the Sabaton album about the Russo-Ukrainian war?
I'm not entirely sure. They said something about that at the start of the war, but I'm not one of their producers or their managers, so I'm not entirely sure. Just keep an eye out for that, and I'm sure that a lot of people will enjoy it. That being said, thank you for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Next up is Mike Spike. He says, worth noting as war drags on, Russian soldiers will become radicalized and desensitized by what's in front of them. It's in our nature. I saw it myself. OIF.
That's true. People do get desensitized as war goes on, but that's just a fact of life, and they're already massacring civilians, and I don't really think they could up the amount of massacres that they're pretty much committing at this point. So thankfully, it can't get worse. It's already gotten as bad as it can in terms of the civilian casualties. So there's no, well, at least in my opinion, there's really no time in the future where they're going to get worse and worse because they've already pretty much hit rock bottom with how they're attacking civilians. But yeah, that's unfortunately a thing that happens in war. It's been well documented throughout all of history that people just get used to this stuff after being there for a while. And so I thank you very much for the support, and unfortunately we just have to face that kind of reality for what it is. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question is from Takata Store. This person asked, will any Western leader shake Putin's hand now?
I don't really know. I mean, not that Modi is a Western leader or anything, but he did shake Putin's hand, and also I believe the Prime Minister of Pakistan also shook his hand as well. But Western leaders, I don't know. We'll have to see in the future if they ever meet with the maniac again, if they will or not. But I really think right now, my honest opinion, they probably wouldn't, and I don't even think they'd talk to him or even get into a situation where they'd be around him to shake his hand. But nonetheless, I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers your question. And how many do we have left?
Let's see here. Looks like three. Looks like about 6 or 7.
Got you. All right. So we're going to knock those out, and then we're going to answer 3 more from the normal comment section. And so, next question.
The next question is from OG Wakanobi. They ask, how did Ruski not know big guns were close enough?
I don't really know the context of that question. How did Ruski know big guns were not close enough? I don't really know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I really can't give an answer to that question because I don't really know what it's in reference to. But if you can join the Discord and reach out to one of my enforcers, they'll make sure to send a clarification of that to me so I can try and answer that whenever possible, most likely tomorrow. But I thank you very much for your support. And I'm not really sure. I'm going to give that as my answer right now. But if you can clarify that later and we can get that knocked out, I'll try and get an answer to that. But I thank you very much for the support. And we're going to move on to the next question.
Right. And the next question is a name that I cannot pronounce. It's in a foreign language. I'm going to put it in the chat. They ask, Avdiivka is between Donetsk and New York, Ukraine.
New York, Ukraine.
I'm not really sure what they meant by that.
Well, at least we got it. If it's New York, USA, they said it's New York, Ukraine. I haven't seen a New York in Ukraine. Maybe it's a really small village or something that they named in honor of New York City. I'm not really sure, but if we could get a clarification where New York is in Ukraine, I think we'll be able to track that one down. But I thank you very much for trying to tip us in on where it is. And I thank you very much for the support as well. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next one is from Caffeine again with a $2 donation. Those were tea bags, you heathen.
Okay. Well, I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to make sure to clarify that in the future that they were tea bags. So thank you very much once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, the next question is from Polar Doom 420. Happy St. Patrick's. Thanks for all of your efforts.
Oh, it's St. Patrick's Day? I didn't even know. I mean, like, honestly, I've been so dug into this stuff and getting this stuff done. I've really lost track of what the actual calendar date is or if there's any holidays even happening at this time. So, happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. Apparently, that's a thing that happened today. And we've got some good news from Ukraine today to celebrate for. So, thank you very much for the support. And I hope that the drinking game is being participated in tonight, considering it is St. Patrick's Day. So, now to give everyone a little chance to have a little bit of fun, that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
The next question is from USN Doc Dorman. Any chance of revolt a la Iraq after Iraq-Iran war?
Is he talking about like a actual revolt in Iraq, or is he trying to make a kind of like comparison to the Russian situation to the Iraq situation?
I believe he's trying to compare the situation in Ukraine to what happened in Iraq.
If you're talking about it in that regard, I'm not really sure if you're asking about the missiles that landed in Erbil, and if so, I don't really have a lot of knowledge on that or where that went because it showed up on our radar, and then I quickly stopped paying attention to it because this takes a lot of time and effort to do. But if you're talking about that in comparison to what happened in Russia, maybe it depends on a lot of factors. It really depends on if there would be any support higher up in the government for that, like amongst the generals and such. But maybe I could see that probably happening in the future. So that being said, I hope that answers the question. It's kind of a short one. I can't really elaborate on it too much. It really just depends on that one factor, and then if that factor is achieved, the rest of it will follow. But I do thank you for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and we have 2 donations here. We have one from Asmati for $10. We do appreciate your support. And the last one we have is from Paul Heil with a $5 donation. And Paul, we certainly do appreciate your support. And that is the end of the super chats.
All right, and so let's get to 3 of the questions from the normal chat. So what do we got from the normal chat?
All right, so from the normal chat, we have a comment from Jason Bourne. He says, did you guys see these old Soviet drones that Russia uses? I didn't even know they had them. They're launched from vehicles that look like ICBM launchers.
I have not actually seen those. I've seen a lot of small ones that are handheld and kind of like carried around in some kind of case, but I haven't seen these big ones that you're talking about. And I think, really, to be honest, I think I've seen what you're talking about, but it was a different kind of drone and it was a different kind of truck, and they were in a Chinese military parade. But I think I do know what you're kind of talking about in a way, but not to a large extent. But I'll have to check into that after the stream, and I'm sure that we've got a lot of people in the comments and our Discord server that can probably help us and clue us into what those specifically are and what they look like and their capabilities and such. But we'll have to look into that, and I thank you for bringing that up to our attention. I didn't know they actually had drones like that. I thought they had somewhat similar to Western drones. But that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, so the next question is from Oleg. He asks, Bill Clinton promised the defense of Ukraine after Ukraine gave up their nukes in '94.
That is true. That was agreed to. I believe it's called the 1994 Non-Nuclear Proliferation Treaty, but we did agree to guarantee their independence in 1994, and it looks like we haven't really put up anything to guarantee that independence with at the moment. So in terms of that, also Britain agreed to that as well, and I believe it was Britain, the United States, and Russia that all agreed to that non-proliferation treaty with Ukraine, but we can see that none of them have really been holding it up as to the wordage and idea of guaranteeing a country's independence was at the time. So pretty good statement. It's very accurate, and it's kind of reflective of how things have changed so much in the last 30 years in a way. And so thank you very much for that statement. It's good to always revisit that. And we're going to move on to the last question of the night.
All right, and the last question of the night is one last super chat we got from Alexander M for $5. He says, do you think Russia is going to invade Moldova next?
Considering it's a neutral country, it is a possibility, but I don't really know. I mean, like that's something that they really haven't included in their statements, as far as I know. They're really just focusing on the Baltic states, parts of Poland, and Ukraine. And I believe that's like their primary focuses from at least what Putin said during his speeches, which is nutty. I mean, like, that's literally trying to rebuild the Russian Empire, because he didn't say he wanted to, like, take over all of Poland. He just said he wanted some of it. And so that's telling me that either he's trying to connect Kaliningrad to Belarus, so that way there's like a direct land link to it, or he's trying to reclaim the parts of Poland that used to be in the Russian Empire, like I believe Galicia was at one point, and the Warsaw area as well. And so that being said, I hope I answered your question, and that will conclude tonight's stream as far as the questions and the news has gone. I hope y'all have all enjoyed it as much as I have been reporting it. I hope y'all have gotten a decent amount of information that y'all haven't heard from anywhere else, and I hope that all of you who are new to this channel that have been watching this enjoy this enough to subscribe. This show comes on every day at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, and we report the last 24 hours news and answer anyone's questions that they have. So I thank you all very much once again, and I hope you all have a great night. Thank you, and good night.